You are barren. The words echoed through the great hall. Not whispered, not spoken privately, announced before every elder, warrior, servant, and member of the Silverpine Pack. You are a useless Luna who has failed this pack for 5 years. Alara Vale stood beneath the enormous iron chandelier, her hands trembling beneath the folds of her dark blue dress. She looked toward the man sitting on the Alpha throne. Her mate, the man she had loved since she was 19. Alpha Rowan. His face was cold. There was no regret in his eyes, only impatience. Beside him stood Seraphina, the beautiful daughter of a neighboring Alpha. Her hand rested protectively over her swollen stomach. The room erupted in murmurs. Alara felt every stare, every judgment, every whisper. For 5 years she had served Silverpine. She had nursed its sick, managed its winter stores, comforted its grieving families, and stood beside Rowan when rival packs threatened their borders. But because she had not given him a child, everything she had done suddenly meant nothing. Rowan rose from his throne. Tonight, I reject you as my mate. Alara's breath caught. Pain exploded through her chest. Her wolf screamed inside her. But before the rejection could completely consume her, something else happened. A tiny flutter moved beneath her ribs. Alara froze. Her hand instinctively covered her stomach. Another movement. Small, faint, but unmistakable. Her eyes widened. No, couldn't be. She had spent years believing there was something wrong with her. The healers had told her she was barren. Rowan had reminded her of it every time another woman became pregnant. But now there was life inside her, and there was something even more troubling. The child did not belong to Rowan, because months earlier, on a night she had tried desperately to forget, Alara had met a stranger, a man whose face she never saw clearly, a man with silver-gray eyes, a man whose wolf had awakened something inside her that she had never felt before. She never learned his name. She never knew his rank. She never imagined she would see him again, until 3 days after her banishment, when she collapsed beneath a winter storm, and the most feared Alpha in the kingdom found her. He stared down at her stomach. Then he smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, almost knowingly. You carry my heir. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. 3 hours earlier, the Silverpine Great Hall had been filled with celebration. At least that was what Rowan had called it. Alara had known better. She stood alone near one of the massive stone pillars while the pack gathered around their Alpha. Seraphina had just announced her pregnancy. The room erupted with applause. Women hugged her. Warriors congratulated Rowan. Elders smiled approvingly. And Alara stood in the corner. Invisible. She had smiled when everyone looked at her. She had even congratulated Seraphina. But inside, something had broken. Because Seraphina was not merely carrying a child. She was carrying the future heir of Silverpine. And Rowan wanted everyone to know it. Come here, Luna, Elder Marcus called. Alara approached. The old elder studied her with disappointment. You have heard the announcement. Yes. And you understand what it means? Alara swallowed. That the pack will have an heir. No, Marcus said. It means the pack finally has a future. The word struck harder than he intended. Or perhaps he intended every syllable. Alara lowered her eyes. Rowan watched silently. Then Seraphina walked toward her. She stopped close enough that only Alara could hear her. You should have left years ago. Alara looked up. Seraphina smiled. You know Rowan never loved you the way you thought he did. Then why did he choose me? Because you were convenient. Seraphina leaned closer. But now he has a choice. She turned and walked away. That night, Elara returned to her chamber. She sat before the mirror and stared at her reflection. 30 years old, tired eyes, a face that had once been full of hope. She remembered the day Rowan had placed the Luna crown upon her head. He had promised her that they would build a family, that they would grow old together, that nothing would ever separate them. She had believed him, until the pregnancies began. One woman, then another, and each time, Rowan's disappointment became more obvious. The healers examined Elara repeatedly. They found nothing physically wrong with her. Yet every examination ended with the same conclusion. No child. Rowan eventually stopped touching her. Then he stopped speaking to her. Then he began appearing in public with Serafina. And tonight he had decided to replace her. Elara pressed a hand against her stomach. Another strange flutter came. She frowned. What's happening to me? Her wolf stirred. For months, her wolf had been unusually quiet. Now it whispered one word. Protect. Alara's eyes widened. Then came a knock. The door opened. Rowan entered. He didn't look at her. Pack your belongings. Elara stared at him. Rowan, you have until midnight. Where am I supposed to go? Anywhere. You're banishing me? His expression hardened. You are no longer my Luna. Her voice broke. I served you for 5 years. And I gave you 5 years to give me an heir. Elara stared at him. Then she realized something. He had never loved her. Not enough to defend her. Not enough to believe her. Not enough to ask whether the healers were wrong. She whispered, Was I ever anything more than a title to you? Rowan didn't answer. He simply walked away, and somehow that silence hurt more than the rejection itself. Midnight came. The entire pack gathered in the great hall. Elara stood alone. Rowan sat upon the alpha throne. Serafina stood beside him. The elders formed a semicircle. Elder Marcus stepped forward. By the ancient laws of Silverpine, an alpha may reject a mate who has failed to fulfill her sacred duty. Elara looked at Rowan. Is this what you want? Rowan's jaw tightened. Yes. The word crushed her. Elara Vale, he said. I reject you. Her wolf screamed. Pain ripped through her body. She fell to her knees. The mate bond shattered inside her chest. She gasped. Someone in the crowd laughed nervously. Serafina smiled. Rowan continued. I strip you of your title. Elara struggled to breathe. Your home. Another wave of pain. Your protection. He paused. And your name within this pack. Elara lifted her head. You are no longer one of us. 2 guards grabbed her arms. She fought to remain standing. Please. The word escaped before she could stop it. Rowan looked away. Take her out. The guards dragged her toward the doors. And then Elara felt the movement again. A tiny pulse beneath her heart. Her hand flew to her stomach. Her eyes filled with tears. She wasn't imagining it. There was a child. Her child. But she had no time to celebrate. The doors opened. A blast of freezing wind tore through the hall. The guards threw her into the snow. Her small bag landed beside her. Then the doors slammed shut. Elara lay there, alone. The woman who had once been Luna of Silverpine was now a rogue. And if she remained within the territory by sunrise, the hunters would kill her. She slowly stood. She looked back at the enormous gates, then at the dark mountains ahead. Her wolf whispered again, Protect. Elara wrapped her arms around herself. For you, she whispered to the child. Then she walked into the storm. 3 months earlier, the Northern Alliance had gathered for the Mooncrest Summit. Every major alpha had been invited. Trade agreements would be signed. Territorial disputes would be settled. And above them all stood one mysterious ruler, the Alpha King, King Darius Blackthorn. Few people had ever seen him clearly. Stories described him as ruthless, brilliant, unforgiving. He had ended wars before they could begin. He had defeated 3 rebellious packs without losing a single soldier. Some called him a monster. Others called him the only ruler strong enough to keep the werewolf territories united. Alara had heard the stories. She had never met him. At the summit, Rowan ignored her. He spent most of the evening with Seraphina, so Alara escaped into the palace gardens. Moonlight spilled across the fountains. She sat beneath an ancient oak. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to cry. "I don't know how much longer I can do this." A voice answered from the darkness. "You shouldn't have to." Alara froze. A man stepped from behind the trees. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in black. His face was partially hidden by a silver mask. Only his eyes were visible, silver gray, intense, almost glowing beneath the moon. Alara's wolf suddenly awakened. She gasped. The man stopped. His expression changed. "You feel it too." "What?" He stepped closer. Neither of them moved. The air seemed to disappear around them. Alara could smell him. Cedar, smoke, winter rain, and something deeper. Something that made her wolf lower its head in submission. "You're afraid," he said. "Of you." "No." His voice softened. "Of what you want." Alara looked away. "I don't know you." "No." He moved closer. "But your wolf knows mine." Her heart began pounding. She should have left. Instead, she stayed. That night, neither of them spoke about names. Neither spoke about packs. Neither spoke about consequences. They simply talked. For the first time in years, someone listened to Alara without judging her. He didn't know she was a Luna. He didn't know she had been rejected. He didn't know she was considered barren. To him, she was simply Alara. Before dawn, they parted. He touched her hand. "Perhaps we'll meet again," she whispered. "I don't think people like us are meant to." He smiled. "You'd be surprised what fate permits." Then he disappeared into the darkness. Alara never saw his face clearly, but she remembered his eyes, and the strange warmth she felt whenever she thought of him. She never knew that night would change her life. 3 days after her exile, Alara could barely walk. The snow reached her knees. Her lips were cracked. Her hands were numb. She had eaten almost nothing. Still, she kept moving, because now she had something to protect. Her unborn child. She stumbled, fell, forced herself up, then fell again. "Please," she whispered. "Just a little farther." The storm grew worse. Her vision blurred. She couldn't feel her feet. She curled her body around her stomach. "Don't worry." Her voice shook. "I'm still here." Then she heard something. Hooves. Dozens of them. Alara lifted her head. Through the snow appeared a group of mounted warriors. Black armor, silver cloaks, a royal crest. She didn't recognize it at first. Then she saw the symbol. A crowned wolf. The king's guard. One warrior dismounted. "There's someone here." Another rider approached. Then the group suddenly became silent. A man dismounted. He walked through the storm without hesitation. His presence seemed to command the weather itself. Alara couldn't see his face. Not clearly, but she saw his eyes. Silver gray. Her heart stopped. No, couldn't be. The man knelt beside her. His hand touched her face. "Open your eyes." Alara tried. The world blurred. Then she heard him whisper, "Alara." Her eyes widened. He knew her name. She tried to speak. "You?" His expression tightened. "Yes." She stared at him. "The garden." Something almost like relief crossed his face. "You remember." Then his eyes dropped toward her stomach. The moment he saw her protective hand, everything changed. His wolf erupted inside him. The royal guards exchanged uneasy glances. The Alpha King slowly placed his palm over her stomach. The unborn child moved. His eyes widened. Then he smiled. "You carry my heir." Alara fainted. Alara woke in a palace. She expected pain. Instead, she felt warmth. Soft blankets. A roaring fireplace. She sat upright. A woman in royal clothing rushed toward her. "Please lie down." "Where am I?" "The Blackthorn Palace." Alara froze. Blackthorn. The Alpha King's palace. She looked toward the door. It opened. King Darius entered. No mask. No disguise. Alara stared. The stranger from the garden. The man who had listened to her. The man whose eyes she remembered. The Alpha King. "You," she whispered. Darius stopped. "Yes. You're the king." "Yes." "You knew who I was?" "No." He approached. "I knew nothing about your position when we met." Alara looked down. "Then why did you bring me here?" His expression softened. "Because you were dying. And my child. My heir." Alara's heart raced. "How do you know?" Darius looked toward the healer. The elderly woman stepped forward. "Your Majesty's bloodline is extraordinarily rare." "What does that mean?" "The child carries the king's mark." Alara looked confused. Darius explained. "When a Blackthorn heir is conceived, the father's wolf recognizes the child. And yours did. My wolf nearly tore through my body when I touched you." Alara looked down at her stomach. 1,000 questions raced through her mind. Then one became more important than all the others. "Why didn't you find me?" Darius's expression changed. "Because I didn't know where you were." "Would you have come?" "Yes." The answer was immediate. Alara looked away. "I was still Rowan's mate." "You were. Does that matter?" Darius shook his head. "Not anymore." The next morning, the palace healer examined Alara. Hours passed. Finally, the healer emerged. Darius stood waiting. "Well?" The healer looked troubled. "She was never barren." Darius's face hardened. "What?" "She was given herbs." Alara stepped forward. "What kind of herbs?" The healer hesitated. "Suppression herbs." Alara's stomach dropped. "For how long?" "Years." She remembered. The teas Rowan's mother had insisted she drink. The powders the pack healer had given her. The tonics she was told would balance her body. Every time she questioned them, they told her it was tradition. Now she understood. Someone had deliberately prevented her from conceiving. Darius's expression became dangerously calm. "Who prescribed them?" The healer lowered her head. "Rowan's mother." Silence. Alara's eyes filled with tears. All those years she had blamed herself. She had believed she was defective. She had endured Rowan's insults. She had watched other women become mothers. And all along someone had made sure she couldn't. Darius approached her. "You were never broken." Alara looked at him. "You hear me?" She nodded. "You were never less of a woman because someone wanted you to believe you were." Her tears fell. For the first time, she believed it. Back in Silverpine, Rowan celebrated. Seraphina's pregnancy had made him confident. He believed Alara was gone forever, until a messenger arrived. "Alpha." Rowan turned. "What?" "We found something." The messenger handed him a royal seal. Rowan's face changed. "The king's seal?" "Yes. There are reports that a woman matching Alara's description was rescued near the northern border." Seraphina stepped forward. "She couldn't have survived." The messenger swallowed. "She did." Rowan's stomach tightened. Then came the worst news. She was rescued by the Alpha King himself. Silence filled the room. Seraphina's face went pale. "No." Rowan stared at her. What? She looked frightened. Nothing. But Rowan noticed. And for the first time, he began to wonder why Seraphina seemed afraid. That night, Rowan questioned the old healer. Was Alara really barren? The healer refused to answer. Rowan grabbed her arm. Tell me. The healer finally broke. No. Rowan froze. What did you say? She was never barren. The room spun. Then why? The healer lowered her eyes. Your mother ordered the treatment. Rowan released her. His face drained of color. He remembered every cruel word he'd said to Alara. Every time he'd called her useless. Every time he'd compared her to another woman. Every time he'd watched her cry. Then he remembered the night he rejected her. And suddenly, he wondered whether he had destroyed the only person who had ever truly loved him. Darius stood beside Alara's window. Outside, snow covered the palace grounds. You should return to Silverpine, he said. Alara turned. What? You deserve the truth. I don't want to go back. You don't have to. Then why are you asking me? Because I won't decide your future for you. Alara stared at him. Darius continued. You were controlled by one man for years. I will not become another. That sentence changed something inside her. She had expected a king, a ruler, a powerful alpha who would simply claim her. Instead, he was giving her a choice. Why do you care so much? Darius looked at her. Because you were the first person who ever looked at me without fear. Alara smiled sadly. I was terrified. You hid it well. So did you. He laughed quietly. Then the child moved. Both looked down. Darius placed his hand over her stomach. The baby kicked. His expression softened. I've spent my life building an empire. He looked at Alara. But perhaps this is the first thing I've ever built that actually matters. Alara's eyes filled with tears. Weeks later, Alara returned to Silverpine. Not as a rejected Luna. Not as a helpless woman. She returned beside the Alpha King. The entire pack gathered. Rowan stood at the front. When he saw Alara, he could barely breathe. She looked different. Not because she wore royal clothing. Not because she stood beside the most powerful alpha alive. But because she no longer looked afraid. Rowan stepped forward. Alara. She stopped. I was wrong. The entire pack heard him. I was cruel. Alara said nothing. I should have protected you. You should have believed me. I know. No. Her voice remained calm. You don't know. Rowan lowered his head. I thought you were the reason we had no child. You never asked. I was wrong. You were. He looked at her stomach. His eyes widened. You're pregnant. Darius stepped forward. Rowan's eyes moved to him. Recognition. Fear. The Alpha King. Then Rowan understood. The child wasn't his. His face collapsed. It's his. Alara didn't answer. Darius didn't need to. The silence said everything. Rowan whispered, How? Alara looked at him. Because I was never barren. The pack erupted into murmurs. Elder Marcus stepped forward. We were wrong. Alara turned toward him. No. She looked across the crowd. You were not wrong. You were deceived. And then you chose to believe the lie because it was easier than defending me. The hall became silent. Her words carried farther than any scream. Darius ordered an investigation. The healer's records were opened. The suppression herbs were found. The orders from Rowan's mother were discovered. The truth spread through Silverpine. The woman they had called barren had never been barren. She had been deliberately prevented from becoming a mother. Rowan's mother was stripped of her position. Seraphina's role was investigated as well. She had known more than she admitted. But Alara refused revenge. That surprised everyone. Darius asked her, Why? She looked toward the woman who had once humiliated her. "Because I don't want my future to be controlled by what they did to me." She turned away. "I don't need revenge to prove that I survived." Darius smiled. And for the first time, Elara understood the difference between power and strength. Power is being able to destroy someone. Strength is knowing you could, and choosing not to become like them. Months later, the first child of the Blackthorn bloodline was born. A daughter. The entire kingdom celebrated. Elara held her close. Darius stood beside her. The woman who had once been thrown into the snow as worthless now stood inside the royal palace as the mother of the future queen. But Elara never forgot Silverpine. She never forgot the woman she had been. The woman who believed she was broken because someone told her she was. One evening, she stood by the palace window with her daughter in her arms. Darius approached. "What are you thinking?" Elara smiled. "That sometimes the worst door closing behind you is the one that leads you toward the life you were always meant to have." Darius kissed her forehead. "And what did you learn?" Elara looked at her daughter. "That rejection doesn't determine your worth." She paused. "Neither does someone else's inability to see it." Darius smiled. "And what else?" Elara looked at him. "That the truth may take time to arrive. But when it does," she smiled, "it changes everything." For a while that peace held. But peace, Elara would come to learn, was never something a person near a throne was simply given. It had to be defended over and over the way a fire has to be fed if it is expected to survive the night. 3 months after her daughter's birth, Elara stood on the palace balcony watching soldiers train in the courtyard below. Snow had melted from the fields. Spring had come early that year, the kind of spring that made old women whisper about omens, though no one could agree whether the omens were good or bad. She held her daughter against her chest. The child had inherited her father's eyes, silver gray, unusually alert for an infant, the kind of eyes that made grown warriors lower their gazes without understanding why. The pack had already given the girl a name that was not her birth name. They called her the Winter Heir because she had been carried through a storm before she was ever carried through a doorway. Elara had not chosen that title. Titles rarely wait for permission before attaching themselves to a person. She was still learning what it meant to live inside a body that people bowed to. For 5 years in Silverpine, she had been a shadow standing near a throne. Now she was expected to speak with authority, to sit in council, to understand trade routes and border disputes and the shifting loyalties of alphas she had never met. Darius had told her she did not need to learn all of it at once. She had told him that she intended to learn all of it anyway. "You don't trust anyone else to hold power over your life again," he said one evening, watching her read through a stack of reports by candlelight. "No," she admitted. "I don't. Even me." She looked up. "Especially not you. I love you. That doesn't mean I intend to disappear inside you." He had smiled at that, the private smile he rarely showed anyone but her, and said nothing more. But not every conversation in the palace ended so gently. There were whispers among the older nobility, the kind of whispers that traveled through corridors faster than any messenger could ride. A woman rejected by one alpha, they said, carrying a child before she ever stood before the king's court, elevated to a throne she had not been born to. Some called it destiny. Others called it convenient. Elara heard the second kind of talk more often than the first. She had expected resentment. What she had not expected was how organized it would become. It began with a letter. A single sealed letter delivered to the royal council, claiming that the child was not, in fact, of Blackthorn blood, that the healer's examination had been falsified, that the king had been deceived by a woman desperate to escape her banishment. The letter was unsigned, but the wax seal bore a mark Elara recognized instantly. The seal of Silverpine's eldest council house. the house that had once served Rowan's mother. Darius read the letter twice before setting it down. His jaw tightened in a way Alara had only seen once before, the night he had learned about the suppression herbs. "They're testing how far they can push," he said. "Or they're preparing to push much further," Alara answered. She was not wrong. Within a month, 3 more letters arrived, each one repeating the same claim with slightly more conviction. Rumors began circulating through neighboring territories. A rival alpha, hungry for influence, used the accusations to question whether Blackthorn's line of succession remained legitimate. Trade partners grew cautious. Old allies grew quiet. Alara understood immediately what was happening, because she had seen this pattern before in a smaller kingdom on a smaller scale. Someone was trying to make her disappear the same way Rowan's mother had once tried, not through violence, but through doubt. Doubt was patient. Doubt did not need proof. It only needed enough repetition to plant itself in the minds of people who wanted a reason to distrust a woman who had risen too quickly for their comfort. She refused to let it work. "I want to see the healer again," she told Darius. "Not our healer. An outside one. Someone with no loyalty to either of our territories. You want to prove it publicly. I want to remove the question entirely. Otherwise, it will follow our daughter for the rest of her life." Darius studied her for a long moment, something like admiration passing behind his eyes. "You've changed since Silverpine." "No," Alara said quietly. "I've stopped hiding who I already was." The examination took place 3 weeks later, conducted by an elder healer from the Ashwood territory, a woman with no political ties to either Blackthorn or Silverpine. The results confirmed what Darius had known from the moment his wolf had reacted to Alara in the snow. The child bore the unmistakable blood mark of the Blackthorn line, a trait that could not be forged, inherited, or faked by any herb or trick known to healer or witch. The rumors did not vanish overnight. Rumors rarely do, but the foundation beneath them cracked, and cracks, once formed, tend to widen on their own. Meanwhile, in Silverpine, Rowan was discovering that guilt does not politely wait its turn. It arrives whenever it wants, usually in the quiet hours when a person has nowhere left to hide from themselves. He had begun drinking more than he used to. He told himself it helped him sleep. Didn't. He would lie awake replaying the moment he told Alara to pack her belongings, the moment he called her useless in front of the entire pack, the moment he watched 2 guards throw her into the snow while he stood inside where it was warm. Serafina noticed the change in him. She did not comfort him. If anything, she seemed irritated by it, as though his guilt were an inconvenience standing between her and the life she had planned to build. "She's gone, Rowan," she told him one night. "Whatever guilt you're carrying, carry it quietly. It doesn't help either of us for you to fall apart in front of the pack." "You knew," he said, "about the herbs. You knew and you never told me." Serafina's expression flickered, just for a moment, before settling back into practiced calm. "I suspected. I never confirmed anything." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're going to get." Rowan stared at her the way a man stares at a stranger wearing a familiar face. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that he had never truly known the woman standing beside him. He had chosen her because she was convenient, because she offered him something Alara supposedly could not, because his mother had quietly guided him toward her for reasons he had never questioned closely enough. He began to question them now. He started with the ledgers. Every payment his mother had ever authorized. Every visit from traveling healers. Every gift sent between Silverpine and the Ashfall territory, where Serafina's family held influence. What he found unsettled him more than he expected. Years earlier, before Serafina had ever been introduced to him, his mother had exchanged letters with Serafina's family. The letters spoke of an arrangement, a future joining of the 2 packs, contingent on one condition, that the current Luna be removed, quietly, permanently, and without suspicion falling on anyone involved. Rowan sat with that letter for a long time before he understood what he was reading. His mother had not simply disapproved of Alara. She had orchestrated her failure from the very beginning, poisoning her body long before poisoning the pack's opinion of her, then arranging for Serafina to be waiting the moment the plan succeeded. Rowan had not chosen Serafina at all. He had been maneuvered toward her, the same way a herder moves an animal toward a gate it does not know it is walking through. The realization did not excuse what he had done. He understood that clearly. He had still been the one who spoke the words of rejection. He had still been the one who ordered the guards to throw a pregnant woman into a snowstorm. No manipulation erased that choice, but it explained, in a way that made his stomach turn, why the manipulation had worked so easily on a man who should have known better. He confronted his mother that night. She did not deny it. "I did what was necessary for this pack," she said, her voice steady, almost proud. "Alara was soft, sentimental. She would have made you weak. She made me better than I am now," Rowan said. "You made sure I'd never see that until it was too late. You're being sentimental again." "No." Rowan's voice hardened in a way his mother had never heard from him before. "I'm being honest. For the first time in years." He stripped her of her council seat that same week. It was the first decision he had made in a long while that felt entirely his own. Back at the Blackthorn Palace, the political pressure had not eased. The rival Alpha pressing the succession question, a man named Alpha Corvin of the Eastern Ridge Territory, had grown bolder. He requested a formal audience with King Darius, ostensibly to discuss a trade dispute. Alara suspected otherwise. "He wants to see me," she told Darius. "He wants to look me in the eye and decide whether I'm someone he can manipulate or someone he needs to remove. You don't have to attend." "I want to attend." Darius studied her. "You're not afraid of him." "I've already survived the worst thing a man like that could do to me," Alara said. "Rejection, exile, humiliation in front of everyone I once called family. There is very little left that frightens me." The audience took place in the Grand Hall 3 days later. Alpha Corvin arrived with an entourage dressed in deep green, the colors of the Eastern Ridge. He was tall, composed, and carried himself with the practiced charm of a man accustomed to being underestimated. He bowed to Darius first, then turned to Alara with an expression that was almost, but not quite, respectful. "Your Majesty," he said to Darius. Then to Alara, "and the mother of the heir. I've heard so much about you." "I imagine you have," Alara said evenly. "Much of it written by people who have never met me." Corvin's smile did not waver, but something behind his eyes shifted. "I only wish to understand the situation clearly. Succession is a delicate matter. The territories deserve certainty." "The territories have certainty," Darius said. "My daughter's bloodline was confirmed by an independent healer with no allegiance to this house. If you have further questions, I suggest you address them to her directly, rather than circulating letters under borrowed seals." Corvin's composure faltered, just slightly, just long enough for Alara to notice. "I don't know what you mean," he said. "I think you do," Darius replied. "The seal on those letters belonged to a council house in Silverpine, a house with no reason to send correspondence to my court, unless someone paid them to." The silence that followed told Alara everything she needed to know. Corvin had not written the letters himself, not directly, but he had certainly funded whoever did. He had hoped to weaken Blackthorn's position long enough to negotiate more favorable terms for his own territory, using doubt as a blade too subtle to be traced back to his hand. "I would advise," Darius continued, his voice quiet in the way that made entire rooms grow still, that you consider very carefully whether continuing down this path is worth what it will cost you." Corvin left the hall without another word. Alara exhaled slowly once the doors closed behind him. "That could have gone badly." "It didn't," Darius said, "because you didn't let it. I didn't say anything you weren't already prepared to say." "No," Darius admitted. "But you stood there and let him see that you weren't afraid of him. That mattered more than anything I said." Word of the confrontation spread quickly through the territories, as these things always do. Some saw it as proof of Blackthorn's strength. Others saw it as proof that Alara was no longer the fragile, rejected Luna the rumors had painted her as. She was becoming something else entirely, someone territories were beginning to respect rather than merely tolerate. But not everyone watching was pleased by her rise. Serafina, still living within Silverpine's borders though her position had grown increasingly uncertain, watched the reports arrive with a familiar, uncomfortable feeling. She had built her entire future on the assumption that Alara would remain broken, exiled, forgotten. Instead, Alara had become the very thing Serafina had always secretly feared she herself could never be: undeniable. Serafina's own child, Rowan's child, had been born by then, a son. But the boy's birth had not restored the security she once believed motherhood would bring her. Rowan barely looked at her anymore. The pack no longer celebrated her the way they once had. Whispers followed her now too. Different whispers, quieter ones, wondering how much she had truly known about what Rowan's mother had done. One evening, Elder Marcus found her sitting alone in the garden where Rowan had once announced her pregnancy to a cheering hall. "You look troubled," he said. "I'm fine. You've never been a good liar, Serafina. Not to me." She looked up at him, and for a moment, the practiced calm slipped entirely from her face. "I didn't force her to drink those herbs. I never touched a single vial. I only stayed quiet when I could have said something. Staying quiet was a choice too. I know that now." Her voice cracked. "I told myself it wasn't my responsibility. That whatever his mother did was between her and Alara. I told myself a lot of things that made it easier to accept a life I wanted." Marcus said nothing for a long moment. Then, "What will you do now?" Serafina looked down at her sleeping son. "I don't know yet, but I don't think I can keep pretending anymore. Not to myself and not to him." Back in the Blackthorn territory, life had settled into something resembling peace, though Alara had learned by now that peace in a kingdom was rarely permanent. It was simply the quiet space between one storm and the next. Her daughter grew quickly, the way children born to powerful bloodlines often did. By her first year, she had already begun to shift briefly into her wolf form during moments of strong emotion, a rare and remarkable trait that further silenced whatever doubts remained about her lineage. Darius often found Alara standing over the child's cradle late at night, watching her sleep as though committing every detail to memory. "You still worry," he said one evening, joining her. "I spent years being told I would never have this," Alara said. "It's difficult to stop being afraid it might be taken away." "It won't be. You can't promise that." "No," Darius admitted. "But I can promise I will spend every day of my life making certain of it." Alara turned to him. In the years since the storm that had nearly taken her life, she had grown accustomed to his presence in ways she had never expected. He was nothing like Rowan. Where Rowan had demanded loyalty without offering trust in return, Darius had given her choices at every turn, had asked rather than commanded, had built something with her rather than simply placing her beside him as decoration for his throne. "I used to believe love meant proving your worth to someone," Alara said quietly. "That if I simply did enough, gave enough, endured enough, eventually I would earn the right to be loved without conditions. And now I understand that real love was never something I needed to earn. It found me the moment I stopped trying to prove anything at all. Darius took her hand. For what it's worth, you never needed to prove anything to me. Not from the very first night in that garden. You didn't know who I was. I knew everything that mattered, he said. The rest was simply details catching up to what I already understood. A year later, Rowan requested a formal meeting with King Darius. The request surprised the entire Blackthorn court. Darius nearly refused it outright, but Alara, when consulted, offered a different perspective. Let him come, she said. Not for his sake, for mine. I want to see the man who once controlled every part of my life stand in a room where he has no power at all. Rowan arrived alone, without guards, without Seraphina, dressed simply rather than in the ceremonial robes of an alpha. He looked older than Alara remembered, worn in a way that had nothing to do with age. I don't expect forgiveness, he said, standing before them both. I only wanted the chance to say, in person, what I should have said the night I rejected you. I was wrong. Not because the truth eventually proved you innocent, but because I never should have needed proof to treat you with basic decency in the first place. Alara studied him for a long moment. Why now? Why after all this time? Because I finally understand what it cost you, Rowan said. And because my son will grow up one day and ask me what kind of alpha I was. I would like to have at least one honest answer to give him. What happened to your mother? She lives quietly now, stripped of all authority. She still believes she did what was necessary. Rowan's jaw tightened. I no longer agree with her. And Seraphina? Rowan hesitated. She's chosen to leave Silverpine. She said she needed to build a life that wasn't shaped entirely around covering for other people's decisions. I didn't stop her. Alara nodded slowly. She felt none of the satisfaction she once imagined she might feel in this moment. Seeing Rowan diminished, apologetic, stripped of the certainty that had once made him so cold. She felt only a quiet, distant sadness for the years neither of them could reclaim. I don't hate you anymore, Rowan, she said finally. I spent a long time thinking I would need to in order to move forward. But hatred requires holding on to someone. I let go of you the night I walked into that storm and understood I would survive without you. Rowan lowered his head. That's more grace than I deserve. Probably, Alara agreed. But I'm not offering it for your sake. I'm offering it because I refuse to let what you did to me define the rest of who I become. He left the palace that same day. Alara never saw him again, though she heard, years later, that Silverpine had slowly rebuilt itself under steadier, more careful leadership, guided by an alpha who had learned, at great cost, the difference between strength and cruelty. The kingdom of Blackthorn continued to grow in the years that followed. Alara's daughter came of age eventually, inheriting both her mother's steady patience and her father's unshaken resolve. The territories that had once questioned her legitimacy came, in time, to regard the Blackthorn bloodline as the most stable rule the Northern Alliance had seen in generations. Alara never forgot where she came from. She never allowed the palace walls to convince her that the woman who had once been thrown into the snow, called useless before an entire pack, had somehow disappeared. That woman had not vanished. She had simply learned, at the coldest and most painful point of her life, exactly how much strength she carried within her. One winter evening, many years later, Alara stood once again on the same balcony where she had once worried over rumors and letters and rival alphas testing the edges of her resolve. Her daughter, grown now, stood beside her, preparing to take on responsibilities of her own. "Mother," she asked, "were you ever afraid you wouldn't make it?" That night in the storm, Alara considered the question carefully before answering. "I was afraid of many things that night. But somewhere underneath the fear, I think some part of me already understood that surviving wasn't only about reaching shelter. It was about refusing to let someone else's cruelty become the final word on who I was. And it wasn't. No, Elara said, smiling. It never is, unless we allow it to be. Perhaps that is the part of Elara's story worth remembering most. People will sometimes define you by what they think you cannot do. They may call you weak. They may call you unsuccessful. They may tell you that you are too old, too damaged, too late, or simply not enough. But another person's judgment is not a measurement of your worth. Sometimes people reject what they do not understand. Sometimes they abandon what they fail to appreciate. And sometimes, the door they close behind you becomes the very door that leads you toward a better life. Elara did not become valuable because she became the Alpha King's mate. She was valuable before he ever found her. She simply needed to stop believing the people who told her otherwise. Now I want to ask you something. If you were Elara, would you have forgiven Rowan after discovering the truth? Or would you have walked away forever? And do you believe that rejection can sometimes lead us toward something better than what we originally wanted? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. I read every one of them, and I would genuinely love to know what you would have done in her place. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more emotional werewolf romances, unforgettable betrayals, powerful alpha kings, and stories that leave you with something to think about. And remember, never allow someone else's judgment to become the definition of your worth. Because sometimes the person they called worthless is the very person destiny was preparing to crown.